Do the joke. Go.
Okay. I think this has been heard by other people before, but okay. After the last weekend and the weekends we've just had, so little girl goes up to her grandpa and asks, do all fairy tales start with once upon a time? And grandpa says, actually, no, some of them start with, if elected, I promise to.
Very funny. Okay. So tonight's topic is in honor of the festival of Shavuot, which we celebrate the giving of the Torah, and there's so many things that you could talk about. Really, any Jewish topic fits with Shavuot, because Shavuot is the day when it all started and where everything comes from, and all our shiurim are from Shavuot. So I thought, why not talk about a bit of appreciation for what Torah is? You know, you could go to a Torah lecture, you can go to a science lecture, you can go to an exercise class, or you can get to, you know, any other type of talk about anything in the world. Yet you have decided to join us tonight in a Torah discussion. So what's different about Torah? What makes it different? What's the uniqueness of our discussion? What's so special about it? So what I thought we would do is, let's start off with just a few ideas on the top of our head. What comes to your mind? What is an initial difference between Torah and other ideas? What comes to your mind? Let's get a bit of feedback. Get your mind thinking. Yes?
I would, first thing comes to mind, it's obviously faith-based.
It's a faith-based book, okay. As opposed to?
Fiction book.
As opposed to a fiction or a scientific book, which is supposedly not fiction. Okay. What else? Any other differences that you could think of on the top of your head?
I'll have a go at it. It gives you the reasons why rather than just how and what.
Okay, well, I suppose that depends on which part of Torah you're learning, but I wouldn't say that applies to all parts of Torah, but yes, that certainly can apply to Torah. Okay. So let's take it for granted for a moment that we all believe in the truth of Torah. Okay, understanding that not everybody that watches us necessarily does believe that, which is understandable. Another time we can spend time discussing whether or not it's just faith-based or there is real evidence backing to it, a discussion for another time. But let's just take it for granted it is real, and that's why we're spending our time here tonight discovering it or talking about it. And with that being said, what would be the difference? So of course the major difference is that all secular study is more or less, good evening, Leon and Eileen, good to see you. All secular study would fall into generally into the category of either man-made or man-discovered. So it's either man's making or man-discovered. However, when we talk about Torah, we would say that if we believe that Torah is true, then Torah is fundamentally not man-made, but it's God-made. It's God's intellect. Okay, so that's obviously the major fundamental difference right at the beginning. Okay, here's another interesting possible difference that I could think of just on the offset as we start. When you talk about secular studies, I mean things that are not necessarily the Torah or Jewish based. Every single subject is its own category. So you can talk about science, and you could talk about health, and you could talk about philosophy, you could talk about religion, you could talk about maths, language, everything. And each thing has its own particular category in general. So there's there's always specialists in a particular area. So somebody could be a mathematician, but he could be terrible at language, right? Or you could be excellent at language and terrible at maths, because every area of secular knowledge is in and of it to itself. Now, the same concept applies within Torah. However, Torah, just like secular knowledge, if you would take all of secular knowledge, covers a variety of topics. We would say the Torah, in one way, is exactly the same, that it covers a variety of subjects, but really, it's less defined. And generally, there's elements of every single area of thought, whether it's science or philosophy or history or language, all coming together. And we believe that there's a statement in the Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, which says, "Hafach ba dekula ba." And it's a statement from a man by the name of Ben Bagbag, who a whole discussion of how he got that name and why he was called Ben Bagbag. And what he says is, there's actually a song about it. What he's saying is that if you delve enough into Torah and you continuously learn and study Torah, you would see that everything is there: health, science, language, maths, every single area that a person needs or that a person can benefit from could be found within the Torah, right? You could learn how to be a good businessman. You could learn how to be a good physician. You could learn how to be a good farmer, a good doctor. You could take examples of so many of the greatest and also, of course, the greatest ethics. And all of that is found within Torah. Okay, so that's very generic. But if you can talk more on a starting to get a bit deeper, Torah, you see, there's one fundamental the first fundamental difference is the first one that I said, which is that the Torah is the wisdom of God, which I'm going to talk to about that in a moment. We'll delve into that deeper. But before I get that, what's the meaning of Torah? What does Torah mean? Right? We're going to talk about the Jewish people. They come to Mount Sinai. They're this family that gets enslaved in Egypt, and God says, "Okay, you know what? This family, I want you guys. I'm going to take you out of Egypt, and in 50 days' time, after you leave Egypt, you're going to receive these commandments, this book, this guide, and it's going to be called the Torah, and I want you to follow it." So what is it? So what does the word Torah mean? So the word Torah, I'm sure most of you are aware of this, comes from the word hora'ah. So Torah means a lesson. So, they say the story is what's the right word that we say? It's usually told about Aristotle, and but famously it applies to most secular academics and professors and teachers of secular studies, but don't tell anybody I said that, even though this is of course on live and anybody that wants could watch it. They should just come and watch it. That would be great. But anyway, there's a famous story. So it's usually attributed to Aristotle, but I think it applies to most of us, and that is that they once see him doing something which is supposedly goes against some of his philosophical teachings and his ethical teachings. And they say to him, what are you doing? Like, you are the great philosopher Aristotle, and you're doing this immoral, unbecoming, unethical act. Is this the way for you to behave? And he says, listen, there's two Aristotles. There's Aristotle, the philosopher / educator / thinker. And then there's Aristotle, the person. And they're not necessarily the same thing. I know what's good, but it doesn't mean that that's the way I live my life. So there's of course that element within Judaism where we study what is good. But the very definition of Torah study is that we're trying to live with what we talk about and what we teach, right? We try to make it live. So we call it Torat Chaim. It's a living lesson. It means that the lessons of Torah are supposed to be not ideas about history. They're not supposed to be mathematical concepts of how you can be successful in life. These are guides, and when you listen to them, you learn them, you study them, they change the way you behave, and ultimately they change who you are as a human being. That's the possibility. That's the concept of Torah. Okay, so that's all by way of introduction. Any questions before I get into the meat and bones of our discussion today on anything that I said?
Can I can I ask a question, but not expecting an answer, but just float a question? And it might be addressed during the shiur. So we talk about you talk about the Torah coming from God, basically, as opposed to secular knowledge, which comes from people. But since everything comes from God, then even the secular knowledge that comes to people also comes from God.
Yeah, so that's why I was meticulous to say, and it's a good point. I'm glad that you brought that up. I was very meticulous to say it's either man-made or man-discovered. So what I intended when I said man-discovered is that it's a man discovering God's wisdom within the world, and the brilliance of God within the world. So I think that could refer particularly to science. Science is our way of discovering God's greatness. We call it the handiwork of God. And God's meticulous. If you study science and you see the way DNA works, and you see the way anything, biology, physics, and you study anything which is that's really studying the work of God, the wisdom of God as well. We don't call it the wisdom of God, we call it the handiwork of God. It leads into a whole bigger discussion, which I don't want to get into exactly tonight, but that's why there is an important concept to that. Okay, any other questions? So I want to introduce our next part with another episode. There's an episode in the Talmud, I believe it is, that the one rabbi makes a statement, and he asks, is there, he makes a statement says, Chachma yesh bagoyim, aval ein Torah bagoyim. He says, there's wisdom amongst the Gentiles, but there's no Torah amongst the Gentiles. What does that mean? And the answer to that is that there's two different things. Wisdom is the ability to use your mind to figure out your surroundings and to understand your surroundings and to understand ideas. But Torah, the difference is like this, and there's numerous points to this. But the point number one is that the only one that can tell you how to live your life, truly tell you how to live your life, is God, in a sense that a higher power, which is beyond your capabilities. But any other human being doesn't really have the right or the knowledge to tell you how to live your life. So that's why secular study, it doesn't convince, it's not commanding ideas. It's not ideas that make a person generally go in a particular way. Because that's the definition. It's one person's idea, one person's opinion, it's one way of thinking. Within Torah, the very definition is hora, that God is telling us that this is the way to do it, as in this is the truth. This is a factual truth from, once again, it takes that faith and that element of belief. But if you believe in the truth of the Torah, then that becomes true, and then it's the word of Hashem that has the ability to tell you what to do and to command you. But nobody else really has that ability. And this is a point that people really struggle with when it comes to Judaism or religions. But we're focusing on Judaism today, is that they don't like anybody telling them what to do. But they forget that it's not just anybody. It's the one that created them and is understanding what's best for them, understands them better than who they are. And then because of that position is beyond their limitations, beyond their existence. That's why God has that ability to tell you what to do. But really nobody else does, except for like your parent can help the child, because at that point, the parent is beyond. But once the parent reaches the child reaches a certain age, it becomes difficult, or it's not really appropriate anymore, because that's no longer really, they no longer are in that position of where they're above. But that's the concept. So the Torah is a teacher. Teacher means it's there to guide us, to tell us how to live our lives. So let's look a bit deeper into what is the real meaning of the Torah. What is the Torah? What happens when we study Torah? For this, I want to take you to chapter 5 of Tanya. Okay, and we're going to touch on certain points, and hopefully it will give us a bit of an understanding or appreciation for what we're studying tonight. Okay, so you can hopefully see my screen now.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I just see that I'm in the wrong place. Okay. Apologies. Don't look at the screen for a second. Okay. Now let's look at it. He's going to start right at the beginning, because I want to focus on a couple of points. I'm going to read the Hebrew parts, and you're welcome to see the English as well. So I'm leaving the English on the screen for those of you that it's easier to read from yourself. Okay. So there's a statement from Eliyahu that says the following: Elijah the prophet, Tanad Eliyahu, the book, so to speak, of sayings that Eliyahu said. And he said the following. He said, Master of the world, you are one but not calculated. And then he goes on to say a few more statements, and he concludes, Leis machshava tfisa bach. Nobody could really truly grasp God. Okay, no one has the ability to truly grasp God. Now, what does this mean? So in order to understand this, he explains that when we're studying something, called seichel, when you understand something in your mind, so let's say you're thinking about, I don't know, the way maths, let's say you're thinking about a particular sum, a particular analogy. So you're thinking of, 5 plus 5. So you can picture 5 plus 5. You can see 5 things coming together. It's just 5 apples and 5 apples. You could see the 5 apples and 5 apples. You could grasp it. You could understand it. It's fully graspable in your physical mind. And the same is for almost all secular ideas, all mundane materialistic ideas. They're grasped within your understanding. And then that idea, you can almost picture the idea within your mind. So what you're seeing is that generally the concept of what does it mean, intellect, logic, rationale, is your ability to understand something and to comprehend it. Can you properly comprehend it? That's the question. And the answer is yes. That's generally the way it is. However, Eliyahu says the same thing applies to certain parts of the Torah. Certain parts of the Torah, you're actually able to understand. If I tell you that the Torah says that the time that you should be saying the Shema is by dawn, from dawn and onwards, now you understand the concept. So now I understand the concept. I'm able to put my hand around it, and it makes sense to me. So now he goes on to say, however, there's a major difference. When I understood the sum of 5 plus 5 equals 10, and when I understood that there's a particular time in the Mishnah or the Halacha when I'm supposed to say the Shema or any other idea, he says the difference is one is a physical, mundane idea. The other one is what we know as chachmato. I'm going to highlight this word chachmato or retzono shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That means chachma means the one concept is actually the wisdom and will of God. That's the fundamental difference between these two things. In other words, what you're understanding, when you understand the way something is just because the way it is, right? Like 5 plus 5, 5 apples and 5 equals 10. And you understand that idea. What are you understanding? You're understanding the idea in its entirety. It's fully comprehensible to your mind without getting into any complex mathematics and methods and all different types of summaries. It's basically your mind, you could teach it to a 5-year-old child. A 5-year-old child could grasp that idea. But when I tell you this is when you should be doing something, so there's parts of the Torah that you understand, but the truth is you don't really understand fully. But what you are understanding is this. You're understanding something a lot deeper. You are now understanding that this is not just something that makes sense on a physical level, on a mundane level. You're actually grasping that now this is God's will. This is what God understands. This is God's wisdom. So you could say, hold on a second. There's parts over here that to you may not even make sense. You may not even agree with them. Or from your mind, you have no understanding why. Why is it that I should be saying the Shema at dawn, from dawn? Maybe I should be saying it in the middle of the night only. Or maybe I should be saying it at this time, not at that time. Why is it that I should be eating only kosher food? So all these concepts you understand, you don't understand why you do it. The difference is like this. If you understand it, what's going on? You're now changing who you are. How are you changing who you are? And here's the drastic point. Okay. He gives an example. It says if in the Talmud they bring examples of you learn certain tractates about court cases, right? If Joe says A and Noach says B, the law should be C. That's the law. And you don't necessarily get why it has to be that way. Sometimes it's purely logical, sometimes it's not, right? But what you've grasped is something much higher. You haven't just understood the way the physical world works, like 5 apples and 5 apples equals 10. You've actually grasped something much greater. What have you grasped? You've grasped the way God thinks. You've tuned into the thinking of God. Now, this is a major changer. So this is the point that I want to show you. Let's look at this inside. Harezeh masig v'tofes u'makif b'sichlo v'tzornech hachmas l'kadosh baruch hu d'leis machshavet v'sabei v'lo b'tzornech. We started off by saying nobody could grasp God. God is ungraspable. You can't truly understand God. But what God does is something really cool. He is infinite. He's way beyond anything you could ever imagine. He, she, it, whatever, everything, all our proper, appropriate pronouns that we'd like to use. God is way beyond your imagination, anything you have the ability. But he gives us the greatest gift, and there's a children's very famous song that we teach our kids from a young age, and it goes like this. Hashem gave us a present. Do you know what it was? He gave us the Torah. Now, little kids don't grasp it. I don't know if anybody else grasps it, but that song is extremely deep. What he gave us the present of the Torah. So there's so many facets to that song. The gift is a way of life. It's a way to live our life. It's a way to connect. But here he's talking about the truth of the Torah is that it's much deeper than that. When you understand that 5 apples and 5 apples equals 10 apples, you're just understanding something, that you just comprehended something. However, when you understand a law in the Torah or a concept in the Torah, you have now created a way of grasping God. Because God himself, the essence of the creator, you cannot grasp, you cannot tap into. You cannot get God. But you can, he's given you ideas that if you learn this idea and you think about that, now what's happened? In your mind, there's an idea that if you hadn't learned the Torah, you probably would not have thought about. You probably don't even think about, don't even understand necessarily. But now by understanding a Torah concept, you're now understanding a godly concept. And what's so cool about that? You see, there's different ways of how people come and unite. There's different ways how people join together. The one way that we can join together and we can feel each other is by talking with each other. Or I can hold you, I can hug you. I can be in a relationship with you. That's one way. So that's a physical connection. That's how I want to hug somebody. That's a physical connection. The previous chapter of Tanya, chapter 4, he talks about that when you do a mitzvah, it's like hugging God because you're doing God's will. But when you understand the concept, he's teaching us the Torah is far deeper. Why? Because now your mind and God's mind are one. You have an understanding on the same level. You know, they say women want to be understood, right? Us men joke that nobody could understand women. But really all they want to be is understood. And sometimes they'd rather just go talk to a few friends that could actually understand them, right? Why? Why do we talk about people wanting to be understood? When you have lack of understanding, that's like, oh, we talk about it in terms of lack of communication. You know, the most important ingredient to a good relationship is good communication. No, it's understanding. When you could understand the other fellow, why? Because when you could understand another person, you go into their reality. You could be so kind to somebody, but totally disagree with them and not understand anything that's going on. But you're living in different worlds. One of the greatest ways to learn to connect with somebody is if I and Noach and me and Yochanan and Irene and Leon, Sam, when we have ideas and we share those ideas, or we could talk about those ideas, at that moment when we're discussing those ideas or we're living in those ideas, we're now living in the same reality. I could sit in the same room, be squeezing a person and hugging them and showing them so much love, which is great. But that person could be thinking about Paris, and that person's thinking about, I don't know, about a business deal. And they're in totally different worlds, but in the same room, they're touching each other, right? Sam is in Boston and Noach's in the temple. But you know what? At the same time, we're all thinking about the same idea right now. We're thinking about ideas have an ability to connect us because ideas are reality. They're a world. They're a reality. So when we as people converge on the similar ideas, we find it's one of the most incredible ways to connect. You know, how many people do you know that are in a relationship, husband and wife, but they talk different languages? Lots and lots and lots. And you know what? They don't last because they're not in good relationships. You could talk a different language, but you could understand each other. So what's the important idea for relationships? I'm sorry, I'm bringing it into relationships over here. But the important idea is, are you able to connect with the other person's mind? Because that's where they live. They don't live in under the same roof. They live in their head. They live in their ideas. They live in their reality. So when you can converge on ideas, then you can connect. If you can discuss a concept together, then you could connect. Yes, Noah?
I can just do the mitzvot. Why do I need to connect with Hashem?
Well, this is exactly where we're going to. You can be in a relationship with somebody and do whatever that person wants. You can make them coffee, you can put money in their bank account, you can buy them nice dresses and flowers, but never understand them, never know what they really want, never understand how their mind, and why do they like those flowers, and why do they want things to be that way, and why is that important to them? Right? You could never get that person. So you're only really very superficially connecting. So the first point with the previous chapter spoke about the mitzvot. And that's exactly what you're saying. Yeah, you could just do what God wants. You could just do what your wife wants, do what your child wants, but never understand them. At least that's great. Yeah, most people don't even do that. But the truth is, if you want to appreciate, if you want to do the mitzvot passion, if you want to do what your spouse wants with passion and enthusiasm, you really got to talk to them and understand why that's important to them and explain that importance. If you don't do that, it's going to be all done superficially and what we call with Kabbalah, it's just like, yes, sir, I want to make you happy type of thing. But you know how much nicer and more appreciated it is when you could stop and you could understand and say, I understand why this is important to you. I understand why this is a thing. And then you do it. You know, you do it in passion. You do it from your own intuition, and you start to get what's important to that. So what you've done now is you've connected on a much deeper level, right? So what we're saying is God, we start off by saying God is not graspable. You know what? Nobody is fully graspable. We joke about, as I mentioned, our spouses. We can't understand our spouses. You know why? Because we never try to get into them. If we made a Torah out of their wisdom, we had discussion out of their world, we'd get an appreciation for that. And then we're not grasping them, but at least we're grasping their world. Right? We're grasping their reality. We see what they're holding. Now, that's the greatness of Torah. The greatness of Torah is you have the ability to be united with God, because when you study Torah and you understand the concept in Torah, you now are seeing the world from God's perspective, almost, kind of. You're tapping into God's wisdom. You're coming to God's reality. And that's a great way to connect. That's in a way the greatest. We're going to see that inside in a moment. Joe's raised his hand. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, just a quick question on that very point. The Torah uses, well, the Hebrew equivalent, the word for, it talks about relationships, that so-and-so knew so-and-so, and that's the choice of word for that relationship. That knowing that's described in the Torah to describe the relationship, is that the concept here as well? That our ancestors, Abraham knew Sarah, then they had children. So, you know, that they were only went ahead and became a family once they were both connected on the same level.
It's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point. Yeah. Okay. It's actually the third chapter of Tanya. So your question is, it's touched on in the third chapter of Tanya, which is beautiful. That you do that you brought that up in a way. So the answer to your thing. So there's a concept over there that he says that what's that to know means that you actually are understanding that person. So we say it means to connect. Knowledge and is also connection. Knowledge of another person is to connect. So Joe brings up an interesting point when we talk about the obvious often in relationships. Often relationships in Judaism, marital relationships in Judaism, often are called ladat, to know. And what does it mean? So we say, oh, what do you mean? They just had a physical connection. What we're understanding is that they didn't just have that physical relationship or intercourse. They actually had intimacy. What's intimacy? Which is an interesting English word where it seems to fit well with the Hebrew word, which is into me see. They saw within each other, they got to know the other person. And through that, they connected physically, but they also connected emotionally and spiritually. That's a really powerful type of union. That's the best way to have relationships, sexual relationships, and all types of those type of relationships, when it's first done in an intimate way where they understand each other, intimacy, right? The same thing is with God. We talk about when you understand the Torah, it's like having a relationship with God in the same way. And I'm going to take what you just said a step further in the very next lines. He says like this, and also sichlo, his intellect is enclosed within them. What does it mean? Within God's will. And then he says, yichud, what does this mean? When you understand somebody else's understanding, he says this is the greatest type of way to connect nichud niflash and yichud kamo. It's the greatest type of intimacy and unity, union, that there's nothing like this. You cannot find such a union in the physical world, right? It doesn't parallel something in physicality. Because let's say I come and I say, Noach, I love you, and I give you a big hug, right? That's wonderful, but I can do that to the guy off the street, and I could give them, it's good and it's healthy, and we should do that, and sometimes feeling a person is important. But I haven't really tapped into the reality. Sometimes it's an expression. When it comes, however, after having understood the person, and then as an expression of that relationship, then it's really powerful. It's much more powerful than the physical relationship. Because then you're now truly united. So we talk about union. A union is when a man and woman come together, or when people are together and they can hug each other. Wow, what a great union, right? The truth is that they could be living in very different realities, thinking about very different things, and not having any understanding of each other. That's the truth. Could you imagine they actually understood each other? Could you imagine they understood what the other one was going through? That's a powerful thing. You know, when you know that somebody understands you and knows what you're going through, and then they give the hug, that's a far more powerful hug, because that is something much greater than what could be done on a thing. You know, we talk about, you know, people write to the Rebbe. We write letters to the Rebbe for blessings and for advice and things like that. And why do we do that? Why would we write to the Rebbe? The Rebbe doesn't necessarily know me. But what we understand about the Rebbe is we understand that the Rebbe, we think that the Rebbe knows me so well that he knows what's going on inside of me. And that's why I'm writing to the Rebbe, because I understand that why would I write to the Rebbe? I could just write to my wife. They know she knows me better. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. You do have to do that better. Sometimes talk to your wife instead. But why is it sometimes you would write to a Rebbe? Because we understand that the Rebbe sees you how you are internally, doesn't see your outside. You write to what do you write when you write to a Rebbe? You write your soul name. Menachem Mendel ben Chaya. You write your soul, your Jewish soul name into the son of your mother's name. Why? Because you know that name represents who you are internally, not your bodily name, not your external name, who you really are. Okay, I want to pause for a moment. Does anybody have any questions or ideas to add to this? I know it's a bit heavy for a Tuesday night. Yes, Joe.
I really don't want to. I don't want to dominate, but I'd just like to add another dimension to this. What I was thinking about as explaining that is, and earlier about the knowledge, the 5 + 5, and so on. I know in the science world, there's been a lot of work trying to establish how clever animals are, and if animals can show secular intelligence, basically, if they can duplicate some of our maths capabilities and show that they have the ability to learn some basic skills. There's been a lot of effort going into that with a little bit of success. I think it's like bees can recognize odd and even numbers, surprisingly, and some animals can count to 5 and things like that. So there's been a lot of work going into that, but there's a heck of a gap between that and the concepts that you're describing, where can the animals study Torah? Can they ever study Torah? Do they have the ability to comprehend the concepts. So is that a purely human thing? And not only just a purely human thing, but within the human race, is it more peculiar to Jewish people to have the ability to study Torah?
Okay. The answer, first of all, I think Torah definitely is the only human thing, because it's academic, it's external, right? Animals, we believe that animals have the ability to understand things that are inside their own reality, and how it relates to their reality, but they can't understand outside of the reality. And that's the concept of human wisdom as opposed to animal wisdom. Animal wisdom is all as it relates to, it's only subjective, so they can understand how to do if you're a lion, you could kind of somehow communicate with your fellow lions, how to do some really cool attack and hunt down an animal. That's pretty cool, and it seems seemingly quite clever. And you see, even elephants are particularly clever, but they don't seem to generally understand concepts beyond what relates to them. In general, there's slight exceptions, but it's not really exceptions. So there's intellect, but when we talk about intellect, we talk about intellect outside of ourselves. So not about us, not relating to us. It's not from our reality, somebody else's reality. That's real intellect, or beyond our reality.
I
right?
think as a Jews, we are God chosen people. We get ability to connect to wisdom of the Torah more than anybody on the goyim, or and it's also, it's in our, I can put it, DNA that's been given coming from, we're choosing people. That's only probably for us, it's to discover all depthness of the Torah and get understanding everything, because it's mostly for the Jews. I don't think a goyim be able to connect to Hashem, because we get some connection to Hashem, and that connection help us to understand and probably be more in tune with the Torah wisdom than anybody else. Well, look, all this beautiful things in the science and everything, that's great. It's absolutely amazing. However, it is only us who can do this.
Okay, I'm going to reply to what you say. Very interesting comment. Irene, did you want to say something first?
Yeah. Look, if that doesn't make sense to me, because of what was just said. Because if a child gets adopted, for example, a child whose parents, for whatever reason, either abandon it or die or whatever, and that child doesn't happen to have been born into a Jewish family, but it gets adopted by a Jewish family, then it can. It's the teaching of the parents and the rabbis, but you can't say only Jewish people who are born Jews. It can be a totally different religion born into, but for whatever reason that child gets accepted by a Jewish family, and it can also learn the Torah and become empathetic and sympathetic and everything. It's not just Jews that can do that. I think anybody can.
I want to combine what the two of you are saying, and I think there's both of you raise valid points. I'll tell you what, there's an element of where I agree that where we would have a Jewish person would have an upper hand when it came to the Torah, because when you feel like it was written and you were obligated and it's your lessons and you were the ones that were at Mount Sinai, it should feel a lot more relevant to you and much more connected, and you should automatically connect to it more easily. However, and I think that is generally the rule. Generally, Jews take a connection and a liking and an understanding to Torah usually quicker. However, some of the greatest Jewish thinkers started off as non-Jews.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, Rabbi Akiva, his parents were not Jewish.
There you are.
So I think there's a certain truth to what both of you are saying. That we do have to acknowledge. We can't say, on the one hand, we can't say that the Torah is only understandable by Jewish people, because from a basics perspective, we say that we have the same minds as non-Jewish people. We're both human. However, we were given the Torah for us, and then there's certain parts that were given also for the non-Jewish person. However, at the same time, if the non-Jewish person really wants to connect to the Torah, and thousands or hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions, I don't know about that. The truth is, by now, with the spread, there are many non-Jewish people that really do connect to the Torah in a very deep way. So I think that there's definitely a truth to what both of you are saying. It's fascinating. We're coming up to Shavuot. I've got a little bit more that I still have to talk to you about tonight, but being that this concept came up today, I'll mention this a certain interesting point. First of all, for those of you that will be coming on Saturday night to our dinner, Zach Gomo is going to be giving a fascinating talk about three interesting converts, really interesting converts, and how they connected to Judaism and their self-sacrifice. And he doesn't like to use the word converts because he's probably watching or going to spy on us on Facebook, as a few other people are. Anyway, I read an article that he wrote about these individuals and what incredible connection they had. And why? Because Shavuot was the time that we read the book of Ruth, which is, Ruth was the ultimate convert, generally, right? She's the great-great-grandmother of King David, the Moabite woman. She teaches us what it means to be a convert from person, what it means to have self-sacrifice for the Jewish people. And ultimately, Judaism is that we all converted just before that we received the Torah. Discussion for another time, how exactly the process went through. That being said, at the same time, we don't have any obligation to teach Torah to non-Jewish people. And non-Jewish people have no obligation to study Torah. Jewish people do. Jewish people have an obligation. We have an obligation to teach Jewish people. Part of the Shema is Vishinam tam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'beitecha u'b'lechtecha b'derech. And that tells us you should teach your children, and we learn out who's the children. The children is your children, your grandchildren, and to your friends' children and your students. So we're obligated to have students and to teach the Torah. That obligation does not fall upon us to teach non-Jewish people. If a non-Jewish person wants to study, it's from their own desire, so to speak. They're not obligated from Torah. They can't be held responsible for not studying and for not putting it in. So there's that interesting balance. Anyway, when we talk about this concept, so it's very interesting. There's one more point that I want to say, and that is this, and this may be somewhat controversial, connecting back to Sam's point. I believe that if you look at the world, you'd see there's something which it's not at all something I want to discuss today, but the world is a bit lopsided. It's a bit, the scales are a bit tilted in the Jewish direction in certain ways. I know they say the Jews run the world. Who can deny it? I'm sorry, we could be here. If you look at what's the percentage of people in the world that are actually Jewish, it's a very, very small percentage. Like 1 in 200 or something like that. If that one, maybe even less, of people in the world, so less 0.02% of the world population is Jewish.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to take that into the world thing, and you look into major philanthropists and major givers and major, people that have achieved big things like Nobel Prize winners, you would think that, out of 200, every 20 years or whatever, however many they gave out, we would win one. However, the fact is that Jewish people have won 23% of all, or even by 25% of all Nobel Prizes. Jewish people have by far the biggest amount of major contributors, whether it's in the world of science, people like Albert Einstein, and in the world of technology. And look what Israel does for the world. Now, it's not for us to show off, but it's to acknowledge that we have a little bit of an upper hand.
Yes.
Okay. And I don't think that's egotistic or that thing. I think you just have to look at the facts. Just look at the facts. We could hide away from the facts. And I believe that upper hand is that we have a certain ability to think out of the box. And this connection that we mentioned to Hashem is this ability to go beyond our own realities. And that's the very principle of what intellect truly is. True intellect is to go beyond your reality, right? And as I'm mentioning tonight, it's not just to go beyond your reality, it's go beyond your reality connected to somebody else's reality. Even in a deeper way, that's really difficult for most people. Most people really struggle with that, Jews included. But the only way you can make real progress in any field, in science, in medicine, in technology, in any area, it's going to be through going beyond your own reality. And I believe that it comes from not that Jewish people are smarter. I don't think if you would necessarily say that Jewish people have a high IQ, but maybe we do, just because of our good upbringing. I don't think it's necessarily that we have a much bigger upbringing. We've been studying books for much longer. We've been people of the book for much longer. We're, if you want to really get into racist discussions in modern day, we're white privileged. Some people want to say that we're white privileged to the extreme, which is what's that white privilege to the extreme? We've just been educated. Ever since the last 3,334 years, our parents have been educating us. But that's not it. The Rebbe somebody once came to the Rebbe and said, Jewish people must be smarter. Look at what all the Jewish people achieve. We don't believe it's that. We believe it's our ability to put our own reality aside and connect to an outside reality. If you want to find a way to cure cancer, you can't be stuck in what you've understood till now, what the principles. You have to keep on going beyond what you've been taught. And that's what Torah is, going beyond your own reality. And I think that's where Jewish people have been so successful, not because they know more, but because they're able to exit their own existence easier. And that's what all Chassidus is about. Many a Gentile have done this as well. We haven't won 100% or not even 80% of Nobel Prizes, because there's been for every great Jew, there's been at least 5 non-great, or whatever. There's been plenty of great non-Jews, but without a doubt, this is an ability. I believe that non-Jewish people have that ability as well. But with us, I think that ability comes more naturally.
Rabbi, can I add to that? I remember when I was studying, Gemara in school and all that sort of stuff, and there were such bizarre cases, and the minutiae, the detail of the cases debated, and the reaction, especially as a young person, was, why I got to learn this? It'll never have any practical application in real life. This will never happen. Like, what's the point? And then here we are, 2022, and bizarre stuff happens that relates directly back to those. The example I'm thinking of is a few days ago, someone shared with me an article about the Bronx Zoo in New York, where there's a group of people who are advocating on behalf of a 55-year-old elephant that they want it to be granted personhood under the government. Under the legal system to grant the elephant, and they were quite serious about this. There's a big group that's advocating, and okay, that's fine. That's their particular, thing. But the question I asked in this debate, which was, well, gee, if it's granted personhood, does that mean it'll also be subject to those abortion laws they're arguing about?
You just put yourself on mute. I don't know if that was intentional. Yeah, that's very funny.
Yeah, so if it will, if it'll be granted, and so there's consequences to being granted personhood.
100%.
And that's the sort of bizarre connection that the Gemara excels at. Is if that becomes true, then that becomes true. And have you really thought through? Be careful what you wish for.
What?
I have a 1 second, Irene. I have a friend when I was in South Africa recently. I had a friend that studied with me in yeshiva, and he told me he told me that he works for a very big international cybersecurity company, and it's not a Jewish-owned company. But what they realize is that he's able to think in a particular way. And they asked him, how are you able to analyze these things in this way? He says it's from Gemara study. He says, I promise you, if you find more people that have studied more Gemara, they'll be able to analyze these things in the same way.
Wow.
So this company started hiring people. Like, one of the best things you could write on your what's it called, application, on your resume for that particular company, and for any other company that realizes that needs people to think in a different type of way, is that you know how to study Gemara. Anyway, it's just a side point, but it's all connected, but not exactly the main topic of our discussion. I want to do one more point. First, I'll take Irene's point, and now I want to conclude the main point of our discussion. Go ahead, Irene.
No, I just wanted to know why the elephant was, what did the elephant do that was so fantastic according to that group of people? Well,
fair point. I didn't explain that. Yeah, so the elephant's been in the zoo for a long time. A lot of people love it. It's apparently like clever and good with the crowds, and I don't know, for whatever reason, its personality. This bunch of people got together and decided, especially nowadays with all the pronouns and the flexibility with gender, they said, well, why not an elephant? We all love the elephant. We think of it like a person. And so they actually launched a case in the courts there, which I think are still going through the courts. It was rejected by lower courts, and they've escalated it to a higher court. And they said, this elephant deserves personhood.
Wow.
Well,
I've got a lot of issues in America, including guns.
I'm sure the elephant will be very, very happy once he's been anointed with the special water of humanhood instead of personhood, instead of elephanthood. I'm sure it'll make its day. Will they start feeding it pizza and pasta as a result as well?
I'd love to see the ID card.
Okay. By the way, when this is a bit controversial as well, but in South Africa, there's a beautiful little place where we were staying. We were staying at a game reserve. We went away with my family. And one of the places that they do is they actually take care of like elephants, at least is what they claim, elephants that had in trouble or whatever it is, have had come and thing, and they take them over there, and you get to do, you could pay to have a, it's called Adventures with Elephants. So we decided we would take our kids there. And the one elephant was they're all super smart, but this one elephant was supposedly really super smart. And they told 5 of the people over there to give them give a shoe. And when they gave the shoe to the elephant, put it on the tusk. I've got a video of this. So if anybody wants, I could stay behind afterwards. I can look for them. Hamish will know what the video is. The 5 people give their shoe, and when they give the shoe, they say their name. Okay, and then the elephant gives the shoe back to the real owner of the shoe. My son Yosef was on a thing. I was blown away by it. So the elephant in a short amount of time was able to see the shoe and actually return it to the rightful owner. So there's definitely yesh chachma b'pilim. There's intellect within the elephants, no doubt about it. But he got a nice serving of food afterwards that might be connected, once again, connected to themselves. Let's conclude tonight. And then if anybody wants to say, I don't have a lot of time because I have a 9:15 meeting and a 10:30 meeting. It's a little bit of a busy night. But I want to conclude, if I'm going to share my screen for one last moment. I want to show one last final thing. Okay, so in conclusion, there's a lot more to say. I showed you the main part about this special unity. So we've mentioned tonight how when we study Torah, we get a a union with God which supersedes any other type of unity that we could have with any other individual. We can have that unity when we understand somebody else's ideas. You know, sometimes you listen to somebody's podcast or books, or you read somebody's ideas in a book, whatever it is, and you feel like you connect to that person, right? And then you meet a person, like I've been listening a lot to particular rabbis, and I like the ideas, and I meet them, I'm like, you know, I know you quite well. So you can connect to those people. That's incredible. But when you study Torah, the uniqueness is that you get to connect to the intellect, the way God thinks, supposedly. You don't see the way it is in the pure sense, and the way it is really in God's sense, but what you do see is you see the way, how God has taken it down. So what does this mean? He said at that moment, you become totally lachodim umyuchodim mamish. You want to become united with the infinite creator. This is how you do it. Study the Torah. Why? Because at that moment you become one from every single greater. And this, he says, not only that, this is what shows us, Noah asked earlier, why should you study, just do mitzvahs instead of studying Torah? We haven't spoken about the mitzvahs yet. It's in the previous chapter. But when you study the Torah in a certain way, you get more connected to God even than doing the mitzvah. Because when you do the mitzvah, you're doing what he wants, but you don't understand why. You understand what he's wanting it for. When you understand why, now you're getting into God's reality, and that creates a real connection. Okay, there was a whole other element that we're not going to have time, they'll take another 20 minutes to explain, but let's take it take this last point. When we are going to be hearing the 10 Commandments on Sunday morning, we have a very special moment where we relive that moment when God gave us the Torah. You see, the difference is, though, when we study Torah, it's not like anything else. It goes inside of us and it becomes part of who we are. So when we celebrate the giving of the Torah, we say the words, and we say this every morning, we don't say Nasana Torah, you say Notena Torah, the God is giving the Torah. Because every single moment that you study an element of Torah, God is there present with you and becomes one with you. You see, when I study idea of some guy that wrote a book and I read the person's book or listen to their podcast, they're not there necessarily with me. I'm connecting to them, they're not necessarily connecting with me. But when we're studying Hashem, we put Hashem into our minds and God becomes one with us. So you want to become divine, you want to become spiritual, you want to become connected to something greater, study Torah. It's not just some human being's ideas. It's the very fabric of the world that we live in. It's the fabric, it's the ideas that have made the world come into being. Okay. There's a lot more to discuss on the subject, but hopefully we've touched on it a bit tonight. And maybe given us a bit more enthusiasm. We'll see next week who comes back. If you come back, that maybe means that we may have inspired you. No pressure. Yochanan, you might be on the other side of the world by then.
I'll be in Melbourne, then I'll be in Israel, then UK, but I'll hopefully be able to connect somehow. One never knows. Marvels of technology, even though you're on the other side of the world. I hope I can anyhow.
Yashar Koach, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great week, and Chag Shavuot Sameach. We say Kabbalat HaTorah b'simcha v'primius. When you receive the Torah, may it be with joy and with happiness. I just want to tell you one last thing. I've got a clock on my wall, and I just looked at the time. It says 9 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't stop saying 9 o'clock. So once it's reached 9 o'clock, it just stopped. So we can go as long as we want now because time has come to an end. Anyway, have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Laila tov.
Laila
Later,
tov.
Todd.